The soft afternoon light poured in through the kitchen window, bathing the room in a golden hue. I stood at the stove, my pregnant belly making me feel as though I were carrying the weight of the world. The scent of garlic and onions filled the air, mingling with the spices I carefully added to the sauce. Each movement was a slow dance, an effort that demanded more than my tired body could give. Carlos's family's laughter echoed from outside, and I forced a smile as I listened to their joy. "Maria, are you almost done?" Carlos's voice rang from the kitchen door, interrupting my thoughts. He stepped in, his hungry gaze fixed on the pot on the stove. "I'm starving." "Everyone's excited to try your special dish." "Yes, almost there," I replied, trying to keep my voice light, though a shadow of exhaustion crept into my breath. "Just a few more minutes." "Great." He smiled, but there was an expectation in his eyes that felt heavy. "The family loves it when you cook. It's always a celebration with your dishes." A tightness grew in my chest. I wanted to be the woman everyone expected, the perfect wife, the devoted mother-to-be. But as time passed, the pressure felt increasingly unbearable. The idea that I should cook for all these people, every day, had become a burden. As Carlos walked away to join his family, I allowed myself a moment of weakness, leaning against the sink and closing my eyes. Exhaustion wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. When I finally called everyone to the table, the atmosphere was lively. I sat down, watching Carlos surrounded by his family, laughing and telling stories. I forced myself to join in, but the feeling of not quite belonging grew stronger each second. "This food is wonderful, Maria," he exclaimed, savoring a spoonful of my sauce. "You really should teach my mother how to make this." Hearing that, a wave of discomfort washed over me. "Oh, it's just a simple recipe," I murmured, feeling myself shrink under everyone's admiring gaze. Their admiration, their expectations, all felt like a weight I couldn't carry. The silence inside me contrasted sharply with the joyful noise around me. I wanted to feel the same happiness, but I felt trapped in an invisible cage. "You should cook like this more often, Maria," one of Carlos's aunts said as she helped herself to another serving. "Everyone here loves your cooking. You're a real chef." "Thank you," I replied, but the word felt hollow. What they didn't know was that behind the appearance of a happy cook was an exhausted woman, struggling to find her place in a world that seemed to spin without her. The expectations of being a wife and future mother were unbearably heavy, and I didn't know how to break free. As soon as dinner ended, I stood up to start cleaning. The clinking of dishes sounded like a sad song in my ears. Carlos appeared again, his expression hopeful. "You don't have to do this now, Maria. We can clean together later." "It's fine, Carlos. I'll finish up quickly," I replied, though exhaustion had overtaken me. I barely noticed the tears starting to form in my eyes. Why couldn't I be the woman everyone expected? Why was it so hard? As I washed the dishes, the voices from Carlos's family faded into a distant murmur. The weight of my reality fell on me like an avalanche. I felt small and insignificant, trapped in a cycle of expectations that never seemed to end. When I finally finished, I went to the bedroom, overwhelmed by a wave of emotions. Hey everyone, if you're enjoying this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel so that YouTube can understand and deliver more of our content to you. I sat on the edge of the bed, and suddenly tears began to slide down my face. I didn't want to cry, but the pressure was too much. Desperation surrounded me, and I felt utterly alone. Just then, Carlos walked into the room, and all I wanted was for him to see my pain, to understand what I was going through. "Maria, what happened?" he asked, his tone revealing a mixture of concern and confusion. "Are you all right?" "I'm just tired, Carlos," I said, trying to wipe away the tears, though it was useless. "It's all too much." "Tired of what?" "I don't understand. You just need to cook a little more, and family is the priority, you know that," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Frustration rose within me, and I took a deep breath, trying to contain the storm brewing inside. "Carlos, it's not just about cooking. It's about everything. I feel overwhelmed, like there's no space left for myself. Like my only role is to be the family cook and not the woman I used to be," I said, my voice breaking at the end. His confused look made me feel even more alone. Maria, you're overreacting. Everyone here appreciates what you do. You can't just give up because you're a little tired. We have a home to take care of, he insisted, and his words cut deeper than I expected. It was as if my struggle meant nothing to him. Give up? That's not what I'm doing, Carlos. I just want you to see me, to understand me. I shouted, my frustration spilling over. I was exhausted and needed him to understand. But instead of support, I found resistance. I can't believe you're making a fuss over this. You need to try harder and stop thinking only of yourself, he said, and I felt myself crumble. Tears welled up, and I could no longer hold them back. I'm more than this, Carlos. I'm not just the family's cook. I'm your wife. I'm carrying our child, and I feel invisible. The rush of emotion left me breathless, but the words were there, waiting to be said. Carlos looked at me, and for a brief moment, I saw a spark of understanding in his eyes. But it quickly faded, replaced by frustration. You need to stop this, Maria. Family is the priority. If you can't handle that, we need to talk. And just like that, the loneliness washed over me again. I was surrounded by people, yet I felt more isolated than ever. The pressure kept building, and each passing day, my desire to be heard grew stronger. I needed help, but I didn't know how to ask. Night fell, and I sat in the dark, lost in my thoughts. What did I really want? Where could I find the strength to stand up for myself? All I knew was that something had to change. Darkness cloaked the house like a heavy shroud. The smell of dinner still lingered in the air, but I had lost all appetite. The table sat messy, dishes piled in the sink, and I, exhausted, could barely stand. Carlos was in the living room, chatting enthusiastically with his family, oblivious to my state. The pressure to cook every day, to live up to their expectations, weighed on me like an unbearable burden. I decided I couldn't endure it anymore. With my heart racing, I took a deep breath and stepped into the room where everyone was gathered. The conversation stopped as I entered. I'm sorry, but I can't keep cooking tonight, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though it trembled. I saw disappointed looks, and Carlos frowned. How can you say that, Maria? Everyone's waiting for your food. You know how much they love it. He stood up, indignant, and I felt a chill in my stomach. Carlos, I'm exhausted. I raised my voice unintentionally. Silence fell, and the expressions in the room shifted. I'm pregnant, and I can't be the only one responsible for feeding this house. I'm not a weekend cook. I need help. Help? Don't be ungrateful, Carlos replied, his eyes flashing with anger. You knew this was part of the deal when you married me. My family is important, and you should want to please them. I'm not your servant, Carlos. I'm your wife. And here I am, alone, doing everything while you enjoy time with your family. It's not fair. My words burst out as a shout, and tears started to slide down my face. I didn't want to cry in front of everyone, but the pressure had been too much. You really have no idea what it means to be a good husband, do you? Anger and sadness mixed in my chest, and I couldn't hold back. I just wanted a bit of support. Sometimes, I need you here by my side, not just as a spectator. Carlos looked at me, incredulous, as if I had said something outrageous. And you think it's easy? You think I don't have obligations? I work hard to support this home, Maria. He gestured in frustration, as if my pain was irrelevant. And now you're telling me you don't want to cook? That you don't want to please my family? With each word, I felt smaller, more insignificant. It was as if he were piling even more weight onto my shoulders. It's not that I don't want to please them, Carlos. It's that I can't keep going like this. I'm not a machine that exists only to serve others. The mood in the room grew heavy. Carlos's family looked at me with disappointment, and I felt exposed, judged for wanting my own happiness. Carlos broke the silence with a tone of disdain, saying, "If you can't handle it, maybe you should apologize and act like a real wife." My heart pounded in my chest. Apologize? You want me to apologize? For being exhausted? For wanting to be treated with respect? I couldn't tell if the tears were from anger or despair. I'm not going to apologize for being who I am. He stepped closer, casting a look of contempt. So, what are you going to do? Leave? That would be ridiculous. You can't just throw it all away because you're tired. I didn't know what to say. The truth was, I didn't want to keep going in this cycle. He didn't understand my struggle. With each passing day, I felt more lost, more alone. And at that moment, I decided I needed time to think. I need to go, I said, my voice calm but firm. I need to go to my parents' house. You can't do that. You're just going to leave it all behind? His disbelief sent a chill through me. Yes, I need to do this. For me. For our child. As I walked toward the door, the voices behind me became a distant echo. I felt Carlos's gaze burning on my back, but I didn't look back. The feeling of freedom as I left that house, even temporarily, was like a breath of fresh air. When I arrived at my parents' house, I was greeted with warm hugs. Concern was written on their faces, and I immediately felt that I wasn't alone. Maria, what happened? Maria, what happened? My mother asked as she led me to the living room. It was an argument. I can't take it anymore, I replied, trying to regain my composure. Carlos doesn't understand what I'm going through. He only cares about what his family thinks of me. You know you can always count on us, don't you? My father said with a serious look. Family is important, but your health and happiness come first. I just want to find myself again. I don't know who I am anymore in this relationship. I feel lost, I confessed, tears slipping down my face again. I feel like I'm sacrificing myself for something that doesn't make me happy. My father nodded, understanding. Give yourself some time, Maria. Reflect on what you really want. Don't make hasty decisions, but don't feel trapped either. You deserve to be happy. I knew they cared, but there was a growing need within me. A need to be seen and understood. I needed to distance myself from the pressure Carlos placed on me. The thought of going back and apologizing felt unbearable. That night, as I lay in my childhood bed, the familiarity of the room brought a comforting sense of peace. I looked out the window and saw stars twinkling in the sky, each one whispering that hope still existed. I needed to find myself, and more importantly, I needed to understand what it meant to truly be me. Days passed, and the conversation with my parents continued to echo in my mind. I didn't want to return to the stifling routine. I wanted to fight for myself and for my child's future. The path would be long, but I was determined to find the strength that had always been within me. Carlos's calls rang endlessly in my mind, but I refused to answer. The phone's persistent buzz on the table served as a constant reminder of what I was trying to leave behind. I was at my parents' house, surrounded by their warmth, yet the weight of my choice still pressed down on me. I knew that Carlos wasn't just worried about what was happening. He felt disrespected, as if I'd broken a sacred bond he thought we shared. Maria, you need to think carefully about this, my mother said, watching me with a concerned expression. Carlos is a good man. He's always been kind to you. But, Mom, kindness isn't enough, I replied, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. Kindness isn't what I need right now. I need support, understanding. I'm pregnant and feeling overwhelmed. He doesn't understand what I'm going through. I know, dear, but you also need to consider what he's going through. He's the father of your child, she said gently, clearly trying to mediate. And I am the mother. I also have needs, my own feelings. I shot back, feeling anger rising within me. I can't keep living this way, just to please his family, while I lose myself in the process, my mother sighed, looking out the window as if searching for the right words in the scene outside. You've always been so strong, Maria. Maybe you should talk to him. Try to understand his side too. Understand his side? I laughed bitterly. Mom, you didn't see what happened the last time I tried to share my feelings. He doesn't listen. He just imposes. I can't go back to living like that. The conversation dragged on, and a feeling of helplessness tightened in my throat. I wanted her to see what was really happening, that this wasn't just about Carlos and his expectations. It was about me, about who I had been before losing myself in this relationship. In that moment, I remembered my dreams, the ones that now felt so distant. I wanted to be a chef, to explore flavors, to create dishes that told stories. Each meal I made felt like a part of me slipping away as I became trapped in a stifling routine. What was left of me? That night, while my parents watched television, I decided to take a walk. The cool night air calmed me. I strolled through quiet streets, watching the warm lights in the windows and the shadows they cast. I remembered how I used to go out with friends, how much joy I found in cooking for them. It was a pleasure, not a burden. What are you thinking about? A familiar voice pulled me from my thoughts. It was my father, who had come out to find me. He always had a way of sensing when I was distant. Just reflecting, Dad, about everything, I replied with a sigh. About who I am and what I want for my life. You know you can count on me, don't you? He said, placing a hand on my shoulder. Your well-being is what matters to us. I know, Dad, and that's comforting, but I'm so confused. Sometimes I feel I should try harder, but other times I realize I can't keep going like this. Sometimes the best choice is the hardest one, he said, looking up at the starry sky. You need to ask yourself what you truly want, and what will make you happy. Those words echoed in my mind as I walked back home. I needed clarity to understand my feelings better. What did I truly want? What was I willing to do to achieve it? The next morning, I decided it was time for an honest conversation with my mother. As we had breakfast, I watched her. The way she prepared the bread, her gentle, deliberate movements. Mom, can I tell you something? Of course, dear. What's on your mind? She asked, looking at me attentively. I'm considering divorce, I said, the words coming out as a whisper. I felt my heart race. She stopped, the knife she was using to slice bread frozen in midair. Maria, are you really thinking about that? Yes. I can't live like this, under pressure and without support. I'm losing myself, and it's not fair to me or the baby, I explained, my voice steady but tinged with emotion. You know this can be complicated, right? Divorce isn't a simple matter, she said, resuming her cutting but with trembling hands. I know, Mom, but I also know that if I keep going like this, it'll lead me somewhere much darker. I need freedom. I need to find myself again, I confessed, feeling tears well up in my eyes. I want to be a happy, fulfilled mother, not a shadow of what I could be. She looked at me, her eyes full of worry and love. I'll always support you, sweetheart, but make sure this is the right decision. Think about the consequences. I know, and it scares me. But what scares me more is the idea of living a life that isn't mine, I replied, feeling a wave of relief from sharing my feelings. The conversation flowed, and I felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. My mother was supportive, but she also reminded me of what lay ahead. She reassured me that, no matter what I chose, I wouldn't be alone. In the days that followed, Carlos's calls persisted. I didn't answer. With each ring, each message, I felt a mix of dread and relief. He still hadn't understood that I needed space and time to find myself. What he didn't realize was that his attempts to control me were only driving me further away. Reflecting on it all, I realized I needed a plan, not just for the divorce but for how I wanted to live from then on. I wanted to take back control of my life, and that would take courage. I was beginning to understand that true happiness wouldn't come from pleasing others, but from finding peace within myself. As the sun set, I looked out my parents' window, feeling stronger each day. I had a long road ahead, but I was finally beginning to walk my own path. I woke that morning with a mix of anxiety and determination pulsing inside me. The day started, of course, like any other, but there was something palpable in the air, a sense that things were about to change. As I looked at my reflection in the mirror, I saw not just a pregnant woman, but a woman on the verge of transformation staring back at me. My tired, swollen face begged for rest, but my heart beat for freedom. I needed to make a decision. I went downstairs for breakfast, the aroma of fresh bread mingling with the scent of coffee. My thoughts, however, were miles away. Carlos was still asleep, and when he finally saw me, he smiled with the confidence of someone who believed everything was under control. But it wasn't. Nothing was under control anymore. "Good morning, love," he said, hardly looking at me as he grabbed a piece of toast. "Could you make something special for dinner? My family's coming over tonight." Those words hit me like a bucket of cold water. The immediate pressure made me feel as if I were being pushed into a deep well. What was so special about cooking for his family? Yet again, what was special about sacrificing my mental and emotional health for an ideal of perfection I could never reach? My eyes filled with tears, but I forced myself to smile. "Sure, Carlos. I'll think of something," I replied, trying to hide my frustration. He didn't notice my hesitation. In fact, he never did. What I felt was like an invisible shadow, something I carried alone. And it led me to a decision. It was time to act. As soon as I finished breakfast, I picked up my phone and searched for a lawyer. My heart raced with every tap on the screen. It was a step I knew would change my life, but it also left me feeling apprehensive. I called a reputable firm and scheduled a consultation. The lawyer's voice on the other end was firm yet reassuring, and it brought me a small sense of comfort. When I sat down at the table, the weight of my decision was still settling over me. The day passed slowly, with Carlos leaving for work, and I felt more resolved with every moment. The time I'd spent with my parents had shown me I wasn't alone in this struggle. I had a support network, even if Carlos tried to convince me otherwise. That night, Carlos's family arrived, and the atmosphere was lively. I hid behind the mask of the perfect hostess, but inside, I was conflicted. As I served the dishes I'd prepared, I heard the laughter and compliments, but it all felt distant, as if I were watching a play. What I really wanted was to shout that I was exhausted, that I needed a break, but the words remained trapped in my throat. Carlos, full of enthusiasm, began talking about plans for the future. Our home, the baby. He had no idea what I was going through, and as I realized I was about to break down, I decided I needed some space, even if just for a moment. The next morning, I went to the lawyer's office. The atmosphere was subdued, but the waiting room held a sense of hope. When I entered the office, I was greeted by a considerate woman who offered me water and a warm smile. Shortly after, the lawyer, a middle-aged man, came in. He had a confident posture and an empathetic gaze. "Maria, right? How can I help you today?" he asked as he settled into the chair across from me. I want to start the divorce process," I replied, my voice trembling but firm. He studied me for a moment, as if assessing the depth of my decision. "Are you sure about this? It's a serious step and can be emotionally exhausting." "I know, but I have to do it. I'm exhausted and feel like I'm only existing, not truly living," I confessed, my voice breaking. The lawyer began explaining the next steps, the required documents, and I listened intently, absorbing every word. My heart was racing, but I felt a growing sense of relief. I was finally taking control of my life. "I'll need you to provide me with some documents and information on the assets you and Carlos share. That will help us better understand the situation," he said, jotting down notes. "Of course, I can do that," I replied, feeling a surge of determination. As we talked, I realized that this was about more than just the divorce. It was about my mental and emotional well-being. I was freeing myself from a relationship that had suffocated me, and with that, I felt a strength that had long been dormant. After the consultation, I returned home with a mix of anxiety and hope. On the way, I thought about how Carlos would react. He wouldn't understand. He wouldn't accept it. But on the other hand, I knew I couldn't let that matter anymore. I needed to do this for myself and our child. Yet reality hit the moment I walked through the door. Carlos was there, sitting on the couch watching TV. He looked at me with a smile, but there was a shadow of fatigue on his face. What he didn't know was that I was about to change everything. "Hi, love," he said, but I merely nodded, my heart pounding. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He turned off the TV and faced me with a curious look. "About what?" "About us, about what's been happening." I went to see a lawyer today," I confessed, the weight of the words falling over us like a heavy shroud. Carlos's brow furrowed. "What do you mean by that?" "I want a divorce," I declared, feeling adrenaline rush through me. His expression instantly shifted from curiosity to disbelief. "You're kidding, right? You can't possibly mean that." "I do, Carlos. I can't go on like this," I replied, feeling a wave of emotion wash over me. He stood up and began pacing, clearly unsettled. You can't do this. Think about our child. Think about the family. They'll blame me, and you'll end up blaming yourself. It's not about them, Carlos. It's about me. I'm not happy and can't keep living a lie. I shouted, my frustration spilling over. The argument escalated, and his words grew harsher. He began accusing my parents of influencing me, saying that I didn't know what I was doing. But with each word he said, I felt my resolve grow stronger. By the end of that night, I knew I had made a decision that would change my life forever. And somewhere deep in my heart, there was a glimmer of hope, a promise that I could be free, that I could be myself again. This was only the beginning of my journey, but I had finally decided to move forward. The morning dawned gray, reflecting my mood. I was at my parents' house, wrapped in their warm love, yet I still felt an immense emptiness. Carlos had tried reaching out several times, but I ignored his calls. His anger still echoed in my mind, and his attempts to manipulate me made me feel sick. That morning, I decided it was time to reconnect with the world outside the bubble I'd created with him. As I sat down for breakfast, I heard the phone ring. I looked at the screen and saw it was Anna, a childhood friend. Her cheerful voice brought a bit of light to the gray day. Maria, it's been ages. Her voice sounded like a breath of fresh air. I'm organizing a get-together with some school friends. You have to come. It'll be fun. Oh, Anna, I don't know. I hesitated. The thought of being around people made me nervous, but at the same time, her voice seemed to promise a bit of joy. Maria, you need to get out of the house. You haven't been the same since you got married. Come on, it'll do you good, she insisted. Those words struck a chord. I had forgotten who I was, the vibrant, dream-filled woman I used to be. What if I went? What did I have to lose? All right, I'll come, I replied, feeling a rush of nerves but also a spark of excitement. The gathering was set for Saturday afternoon, and the week dragged on. I prepared for the event as if it were a grand occasion. I chose a dress I hadn't worn in ages, one that reminded me of happier times. As I looked in the mirror, I saw the reflection of a Maria trying to find herself again. On the day of the get-together, I arrived at the cafe where we were meeting. The place was filled with laughter and lively conversations. As soon as I walked in, Anna spotted me and came running toward me. You made it, she exclaimed, wrapping me in a warm hug. I've missed you. Come on, everyone's in the back. As we walked, my heart raced. The group was gathered around a large table, and when they saw me, they all greeted me with smiles. I felt a bit out of place at first, but the positive energy quickly wrapped around me. Maria, so good to see you, said Lucas, an old friend from school. How have you been? I'm trying to get back on my feet, I think, I replied, forcing a smile. The hours flew by, and I started to relax. Between laughter and memories, I realized that despite the turmoil I was going through, something inside me was still alive. I began to unwind and enjoy myself. At some point, the conversation turned to cooking, and Anna, always lively, started talking about new dishes she tried. You should come cook with me one of these days, she said, winking. I miss your recipes. Remember when we used to make those pies together? Those memories brought a genuine smile to my face. Cooking, which had once felt like an oppressive duty, started to feel like a forgotten passion I could rediscover. The idea of cooking again, but now for pleasure, filled me with hope. Of course, let's do it, I replied, feeling a renewed energy within me. The gathering ended, and I returned to my parents' house with a smile on my face and warmth in my heart. That connection with friends made me realize I wasn't alone. There were people who cared about me, who remembered the woman I'd been before I got lost in a stifling relationship. In the following days, I began to reconnect with my kitchen. Instead of cooking out of obligation, I started experimenting with new recipes, savoring the aromas of spices, and enjoying the colors of fresh ingredients. Every vegetable I chopped, every blend of spices became an act of rediscovery. One morning, as I stood in the kitchen, my mother entered and leaned against the doorway, watching me with a smile. You look different, Maria. There's a sparkle in your eyes, she said. I looked at her, and the truth was, I felt different. I was beginning to find myself again. I'm enjoying it again, Mom. Cooking isn't a chore anymore. It's something I want to do, I admitted, smiling contentedly. I'm so glad to hear that. You deserve to be happy, she said, stepping forward to give me a warm hug. The days turned into weeks, and I allowed myself to explore not only cooking but also my newfound freedom. I started going out more, meeting friends, and even making new acquaintances. With each passing day, I felt stronger and more confident in my decision to distance myself from Carlos. One day, while shopping for fresh ingredients for a recipe I wanted to try, the vibrant atmosphere of the market surrounded me, making me feel alive. The freedom I had gained was becoming a tangible reality. As I walked down the aisles, basket in hand, I noticed a group of women chatting animatedly about recipes. Have you ever tried making lemon risotto? One of them asked. No, but it sounds delicious, I replied, joining the conversation. And so, little by little, I let myself engage in new experiences. Conversations about cooking, recipe tips, and even plans for a potluck began to become part of my routine. I was becoming the woman I'd always been, but who had been lost amid someone else's demands. With every dish I prepared, with every new friend I made, I felt I was building something new for myself. The pressure from Carlos seemed to be fading, and I finally understood that I could be happy without him. Maria was coming back, and I couldn't have been prouder of myself. The sun peeked shyly through the window of my new apartment, illuminating the empty spaces I was beginning to call home. It was a strange yet liberating feeling. After months of tension and uncertainty, I was finally ready to close a chapter of my life that had become a heavy burden. The decision to move forward, even with my pregnancy far along, gave me an inner strength I didn't know I had. That day, I'd scheduled a meeting with my lawyer to go over the final details of the divorce process. The anticipation made me nervous, but I knew I needed to end this phase once and for all. As soon as I arrived at the office, I was greeted by him with an encouraging smile. Maria, are you ready? He asked, gesturing for me to sit. I am, but I must admit I'm apprehensive, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. That's normal. You've been through a lot, but the important thing is we're close to resolving everything. As he reviewed the documents, my heart raced. What awaited me in that meeting? I knew Carlos would try everything to manipulate me, but I was determined not to give in. With each word the lawyer spoke, I felt the pressure mounting, but also a growing sense of relief. Maria, there are a few irregularities we've discovered. Carlos hid some assets during the process, the lawyer said, and his words were a shock. What do you mean? I asked, trying to process the information. He didn't declare certain properties and investments. This could change the direction of the case. A chill settled in my stomach. Carlos's manipulations knew no bounds, and that revelation filled me with a mixture of anger and determination. We need to confront him about this. I won't let him get away with it, I declared, my voice more resolute. He couldn't escape unscathed. The meeting dragged on, but with every passing minute, I felt stronger. My lawyer's words reminded me that I wasn't alone in this fight and that, finally, I could regain control of my life. That same evening, back home, I decided it was time to confront Carlos. He couldn't continue believing that his lies and manipulations would leave me passive and voiceless. I took a deep breath and called him. Carlos, we need to talk, I said, trying to keep calm despite the nervousness rising inside me. What do you want, Maria? He replied, irritation clear in his voice. It's about the divorce process. I found out you hid assets, and this needs to be addressed. I won't accept any more lies. There was silence on the other end. I could almost hear his mind racing, trying to come up with a convincing response. You know this is just a tactic to try and hurt me, right? He said, attempting to turn the situation around. I'm not the one lying. You need to understand that your manipulations won't work anymore. I'm determined to move forward, and you're going to face the consequences. He let out a contained laugh, as if amused. You really think you'll pull this off? He sneered. You're just a pregnant woman, Maria. What can you possibly do? His words hit me like a punch to the gut, but at the same time, they gave me even more courage. It was time to show him that the strength I'd found was more powerful than any insult. I'll do whatever it takes, Carlos. I'm ready to fight for my life and for our child's future, I replied, my determination clear in my voice. Good luck with that, he said before hanging up. That was a pivotal moment. I knew I was on a difficult path, but the certainty that I could build something different filled me with hope. The court date approached quickly, and I prepared for the battle. On the day of the hearing, the atmosphere was tense. The courtroom was full, and I felt a bit lost among so many voices. Yet, at the same time, a sense of purpose enveloped me. When I entered the room, I saw Carlos sitting there, an arrogant expression on his face. He seemed oblivious to the gravity of the situation. The lawyer began presenting the facts, and with each word, I felt stronger. Carlos tried to defend himself, but his lies were unraveling, and I knew I had to remain firm. What do you have to say about the hidden assets? My lawyer asked, and the room fell silent. All eyes on Carlos. This is just Maria's attempt to hurt me. There's nothing hidden, he said, but his voice trembled slightly. We have evidence that you transferred assets to third parties, Carlos. The lawyer continued, displaying documents I had painstakingly gathered. Carlos turned pale. The confidence he'd shown before vanished, and I realized I was finally exposing his manipulation. You can't do this, he shouted, but his voice had lost its power. The hearing continued, and with each new piece of evidence presented, I felt a weight lifting from me. The sense of justice being served was liberating. The judge listened attentively and, at last, gave his ruling. In light of the presented evidence, I rule in Maria's favor, ordering an equitable division of assets and holding Carlos accountable for his actions. The words echoed in my mind like a victory chant. I was finally free. The court decided I would no longer be a victim of Carlos's manipulations. Tears streamed down my face, but this time they were of relief and happiness. As I left the courtroom, I felt as if the weight of the world had been lifted from my shoulders. I looked up at the sky and took a deep breath, feeling the fresh breeze. It was time to start over. A new chapter in my life began to take shape before me. When I returned home, the first thing I did was open the windows, letting the light flood in. Looking around, I realized I needed to turn this place into a real home. I decided that night I would prepare a special dinner. It wouldn't be just any dinner, but one that celebrated my freedom, my new life. As I chopped vegetables, memories of Carlos and everything we'd been through were still there, but they no longer controlled me. The kitchen, once a place of obligation, had now become a space for expression and joy. What are you making? Asked a friend who'd called to check on me. I'm preparing something special to celebrate, I replied, smiling. How about I bring some other friends over? We could make it a party, she suggested enthusiastically. I'd love that. I agreed, feeling my heart warm. As I prepared dinner, the aroma filled the air, and I could already imagine the laughter and conversation in my new home. This was my new reality, a new chance to be happy. With my baby growing inside me and a bright future ahead, I knew that despite everything, life had so much to offer, and I was ready to embrace it all, rediscovering who I truly was. And we've reached the end of another story. If you enjoyed it, leave a comment telling us what you thought about it, and make sure to subscribe to the channel so that YouTube understands that you liked it and recommends more videos to you.